You are listening to In Studio from Simply Timeless. I'm your host, Jay Daniels. We're joined by bassist Leon Lee Dorsey. His latest release is a collaboration with drummer Mike Clark and pianist Harold Mabern. The album is titled as a tribute to the late pianist, Thank You, Mr. Mayburn. That studio session would be Mr. Mayburn's last. Lee and I talk about those moments of working with Harold and Mike, but we also discuss the fundamentals of leading an ensemble as a bassist. Our conversation begins with Leon's childhood years in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
Pittsburgh has a tremendously rich jazz history, going back to people like Roy Eldridge and, many generations into the swing era, Earl Father Hines. Then you get to all the legends, Art Blakey and the George Benson, Stanley Turrentine, and even up to one of my peers, the great Jeff Watts. So, that has a Ray Brown, the great bassist, Paul Chambers. So growing up, you kind of know about it, whether you're involved in music as well, obviously, Earl Garner. So that's kind of like a cultural phenomena in that community, that all these great legends and icons have come from the neighborhood, the various neighborhoods scattered throughout the city. So you kind of have a general appreciation whether you participate in music or not.
And was music a part of your upbringing in your family?
My mother played piano, but she wasn't professional. But it was my parents from the generation, they had Ellington records and things like that. Very high level. And they were very supportive from the minute I kind of thought to choose piano in second or third grade, and also high level appreciation. I had no brothers and sisters as far as looking up to someone playing, but appreciation was, at a very early age and all.
So who were some of the musical artists that you were hearing? You mentioned Duke Ellington as being one of them, but when you were growing up, who were some of the artists that you were hearing? And it doesn't have to be jazz specific.
Because I studied classical, I kind of got that through my training, both Mozart, Bach, and what have you. And like most kids, I really very eclectic. Even to this day, on the FM stations, you heard Led Zeppelin, and groups like that. On the AM stations, you heard Elton John. On the R&B stations, you heard, some of the Motown things and people like that. So really a cross section of music. So my appreciation, even to this day, it goes across virtually all genres. I had training was primarily classical. And really I had an appreciation for jazz, and that was on the radio like certain days. But I probably heard much more popular styles through elementary and junior high, and then slowly kind of weaned myself. I knew Dizzy Gillespie and people like that, Ellington, were, but that certainly wasn't my primary listening categories per se.
And while your primary instrument now is the double bass, that's not where you started. You started out, you mentioned that your mother was a pianist, not professionally or anything, but you actually started with the piano and the cello.
Right. Well, it's funny that I got to the bass because I took private piano lessons through school, third grade. And then there were three of us. Three people wanted to play the cello, which was funny because it was one bass in elementary school and two cellos. And we were like, I don't even know how they decided. And so the amazing thing, I could have been playing upright bass since fourth grade, but for some reason, all of us wanted to play cello. And so that kind of took me into the all-city orchestra, elementary, junior high, what have you. And in junior high, in seventh grade, I got an electric bass. So that kind of got me into virtually all of the popular styles of the day, from, Rolling Stones to Chicago to Kool and the Gang to Temptations, right? So here I am, I'm studying classical cello, simultaneously listening to, AM radio of the day, which was, Elton John, Chicago, whatever, and then listening to a lot of the Motown as well. And probably coming out of high school, out of junior high, is when I kind of found out about people like Stanley Clarke. And, I just kind of found out about people's names, probably less focused on the style of music per se. But into high school, I did see bands everywhere from John McLaughlin to Tower of Power to Kool and the Gang, kind of a cross section. Todd Rundgren, some R&B, some fusion. So, again, I was kind of just feeding. And I was studying classical cello actually from somebody from the Pittsburgh Symphony, pretty much from junior high to the end of high school.
What made you fall in love with the bass? Not just the acoustic or the electric, but just really being able to be the foundation of rhythm with the bass. What made you fall in love with the instrument?
That's a great question. And I guess when you're younger, you're either directed to an instrument, your parents say, oh, you're going to go study piano, or you have some propensity towards singing or something like that. But I don't know what, I can't, without, going, just kind of almost guessing, second guessing myself. I mean, I guess I just like to feel what its role in the music. Probably, as young as I was, it was probably somewhat elementary in terms of like what things I identified with. Because I think when you're young, you're not overthinking it, which may be some of the great benefits of being young starting. You're not kind of just enjoy it. Even I tell my students at Berkeley, I said, you want to maintain almost that childlike quality that made you attracted to music in the first place. It's not like I said, C minor 7 is not why you love a song. It's part of the mechanics of the song, but whether it's major, minor, or whatever, the meter, I said it's the non-tangible part about music. So I would have to say probably something non-tangible about the bass is really what attracted to me. And still to this day, that still holds true.
And your love of that instrument, your love of music in general, that's really what propelled you through your academic studies. Not only did you play in orchestras and bands throughout grade school, but you went on to Oberlin College. You got your bachelor's from there. You ended up with 2 master's degrees, one from University of Wisconsin, Madison, the other.
You don't get it right, you got to go back and do it again. Actually, I went to Madison because my instructor was the great Richard Davis, who played with Stravinsky, Thad Jones, Mel Lewis. He's on thousands of records. And the reason I went there was because he's on Bruce Springsteen's Born to Run. He's also on Eric Dolphy's Out to Lunch. And when he got his NEA Masters a few years ago, there's footage with Igor Stravinsky. And I wanted to be this kind of player with no limitations regard to capability and functioning in genre.
What role do you believe that the bass plays in a trio setting? I mean, why is it intricate to the conversation among the 3 players?
Well, the bass is the one instrument that's harmonic and rhythmic. Now, obviously, inherently, every instrument has to play rhythmically. But if we think about a horn player or guitar player, we're thinking about the melodic material primarily, though they can comp, obviously. And drummer is exclusively rhythm. But with the bass, you're providing harmonic information, foundation, as well as holding down the time. And Ron Carter always said, the bass, he was like, the bass really controls the band. You listen, and I mean, he's a perfect example of how significant the bass player is in terms of like the overall feel. Many singers will tell you they reference the bass because they're trying to think of their pitch in association to the root, right? So just instrumental from the foundational component of the ensemble, whether, big band, trio, which we're kind of focusing on here. And most of the great bass players are on some extraordinary trio, ensembles. Like Ray Brown played with Oscar Peterson for 15 years. And we can go down the list of bass players of Ahmed Jamal. Scott LaFaro played with Bill Evans. I mean, you could just go through various periods and look at how significant these great bass players were in terms of, their role in a particular ensemble. And it was quite extraordinary. And then many of the bass players who even associate with larger, small groups, like somebody like Paul Chambers, who's associated with Miles Davis Quintet and Sextet, even they, in their solo outings, many times are on trio projects, as well as somebody like Wes Montgomery. There's several records with Jimmy Cobb and Paul Chambers in the rhythm section, along with Wendy Kelly and all. So the role is obviously primarily one holding down time and rhythm, but really dictates the feel because our role is so consistent. It's not like we take a solo and we go to the side of the bandstand like a horn player, or even a piano player. As we move through the different generations, when you get to the 1960s, people like Herbie Hancock and McCoy Tyner, they're even laying out, which was not something that was common early on. So the bass role is like kind of continuous harmonically and rhythmically in terms of importance to any particular ensemble, trio or otherwise.
I was listening to the tracks on this album that you did with pianist Harold Mabern and Mike Clark. Thank You, Mr. Mayburn, the name of the release. And the one thing that I loved to listen to was the back and forth, specifically between you and Mr. Mayburn, where there were times where he would have the lead and you would have the underpinning, so to speak, on the bass. And then there were other times, specifically on, say, a track like Misty, which your particular recording opens up it, you know, the bass is taking the melody of the song. You know. To the listener who is not that well informed or has not listened to jazz all that much, it may be a bit jarring to hear the bass taking the lead role. You're expecting an instrument like a horn or the piano or a vocalist to take it. When you approach a song such as Misty, and you're providing the lead voice on it, Mr. Mayburn joins you about halfway through the song. What is it that you are seeking to provide as being the lead voice? I mean, what is it that what are the things that you're seeking to include, not only in the melody, but also that continuity with the rhythm?
There's probably two people I look to. I might look to a bass player and go like their interpretations of something. But when I'm doing that kind of ballad, I can almost say I'm listening to exclusively two people, as well as when I played the melody on Bye Bye Blackbird.
Yes.
I'm thinking about Sarah Vaughan and Miles Davis. So I'm just trying to make music and I happen to play the bass, right? So I want the person that listens to Sarah Vaughan have that same emotional feeling when they hear me play it on the bass, or Bye Bye Blackbird. I want them to think about those Miles records where he's playing My Funny Valentine, or even Bye Bye Blackbird itself. So I'm just thinking about the communication element. I'm devoid of the fact that, oh, well, this is how it's going to sound on bass. I'm just thinking about communicating to the audience the way a vocalist or horn player do, actually.
Had you worked with Harold Mabern previously? I assume you have.
Yeah, primarily with the George Coleman Quartet and the George Coleman Jr. Octet. We played, quite a few gigs in town at the Jazz Standard, and had a great ensemble. And Mr. Mayburn was in all these ensembles, had a very long-standing friendship, musical relationship with George Coleman, as well as his son, George Coleman Jr. And, they're both from Memphis and all. And he's one of the all-time greats. He's like maybe a year or two older than, say, somebody like Herbie Hancock and Chicory McCoy Tyner. But he's basically from that generation. And the pianists and the musicians who come from that area, just like if we're talking about Detroit or Philly or New York, or Pittsburgh, my hometown, there's a particular flavor that these musicians have. That kind of blues, soulful quality is really distinct, along with all the jazz, vernacular and language that you'd assume a player would have and all. So that's really one of the signature qualities of his playing. So he's definitely a byproduct of his generation when you look at Herbie Hancock, McCoy Tyner, and then you look at the signature elements that musicians from that part of the country bring as well. So he's quite an amazing player, beautiful personality, which, many of the younger players will tell you the countless musicians been mentored by him. He also had taught at William Patterson for many years as well. This
session with drummer Mike Clark, it turned out to be the last recordings that would be made with Mr. Mayburn. I mean, you had no idea, knowing that at the time. And so how does that news in retrospect make these recordings so special to you? I mean, clearly the album is a tribute to Harold Mabern in its title. Thank you, Mr. Mayburn.
Yeah. It's so many different emotions. I was actually in Boston, and Mike Clark was in Japan, and he texted me or emailed. I hadn't even heard, it was in the middle of the night or something, and we were both just floored, all of the music community was. And the funny thing is the session got done, and I think I still have them. Harold sent me some great emails about, I enjoyed the session. I think you really got something there, and I said, well, we only got something there because you were on the session. But Mike had told me he had run into Harold at Smoke, And he said, "Oh, we need to do that again," and a lot of times, like a great meal or experience you have in your life, you're thinking, well, you got to at least replicate that. I need to go back to Italy again or something, so I'm just like, again, obviously we had no idea. And I really planned to maybe release it at the end of that year. But between the commuting to Boston and all, and I said, you know what, I really want to do this right. I'm not going to rush mixing it and, try to get it all pressed and released. And I just said, you know what, I'm just going to let it settle. And when I kind of feel like it's time to kind of get everything lined up and do it. And I'm very happy that I waited, because another record had come out, Mayburn Plays Mayburn, came out maybe 3 or 4 months later, and I would have hated to be in conflict with something like that. Great record, obviously, on Smoke Sessions. And even in 2020, I thought, okay, maybe the summertime, and then, you kind of have the whole situation with the COVID and all. And then I was doing in the middle of the Sgt. Pepper project, and I just said, okay, we're going to do that. And then somewhere late fall, I'll finish all the preparations, mastering and kind of logistics to go on. And, I feel like it's a great tribute. Yeah. I mean, this kind of artist, if I'd have made 50 records, there's nothing that you can say about these kind of artists with this kind of talent and, career spanning 60 years and all. So, I'm just happy, fortunate that he was available to do it, was willing, and, just made the record as special as you could hope to have, And Mike Clark as well, I should just say, obviously everybody knows him from the Herbie Hancock. He's on prolific drummers as there been in his generation. But Mike also had a lot of background, playing a lot of R&B, a lot of blues. And, some of the signature things like Raking and Scraping, Watermelon Man, and I'm Walking. Mike and Harold do some things that like probably nobody else on the planet could do. Harold, Memphis, and Mike, his background, from his generation, he brings from that Bay Area, he brings something different than just kind of the grooves you associate with those particular songs, those more fatback grooves. Him and Harold had really some magic going on, I thought.
It was a real blessing to be a part of that then.
Oh, you cannot imagine. Just like, you're just trying to hold on when you got that level of iconic musicianship. You're just trying to, okay, I'm holding on to the railing.
You hear stories about people, oh, you should have been there back in 71 or whatever for this. And you can say, I was there for this particular session. And I know that you likely went in with one intention as far as, okay, we'll record these and package it this way. But then it turned out to be a totally different output in the end. And
very different. And the other thing that was unusual was, I think it maybe saved for 2 tunes, and I think I was more concerned with the length or how I played. Almost everything is one take. I think Bye Bye Blackbird had a second take. And I think I was just shortening or extending take an extra course, And then I think that maybe Moment's Notice had a second take. I don't think there was not any second takes on anything else.
Thinking about not only your career and that of Mike Clark's, but in thinking about Harold Mabern's, how do you think this album showcases his creative talents at that stage in his life?
Bill Makowski, who wrote the liner notes, which, they're like special in themselves. You're talking about somebody who understands the music, has done this countless times, understood the history of, Mayburn and Clark as well. And really kind of almost spoke to the energy that was on the record. And one of the things I said, and he actually put it in the liner notes, was, I just wanted Harold to come in and have a good time. I didn't go like, okay, here's 10 of my standards and here's the music to go, and I just, I kind of told him what I had in mind. And maybe we added one thing at the date, but I think I kind of told him what I was thinking about. And I went back also and checked out a few of his last records. And that's why I included I'm Walking, because that was on one of his previous records. And while I had played other of his pieces with the octet, beyond Raking and Scraping, given that he had released that Mayburn Plays Mayburn, I didn't feel like I needed to kind of go down that road because that was kind of one of his final projects as well. So I kind of felt like, I'm just going to do like a listener friendly project in terms of like, people are going to know Summertime. They're going to know Misty. They're going to look at it and the listener's not going to have to think about it, and they go like, okay, what's going to happen? And almost like you would come out to a club or you put on one of your favorite records. I just wanted to kind of make it like a feel good experience all the way around, showcasing, the three of us and all.
So thinking about the listener, what do you hope they will discover within that album among the songs that they know and perhaps some that they don't?
I think the first thing will be just like the feel and the groove. You can talk about technique and, little technical things, but I just think you go like, wow, it's like you walk past the best pizza place in Manhattan, you go like, in your mouth just is watering, like your brain there's no right brain, left brain. It's just like all senses, And so I wanted to just be like that stack of pancakes where the maple syrup's just dripping over the pancakes, and you just like, just like that. Not, nothing, nothing else, nothing complicated at all,
And working with Harold Mabern and Mike Clark on this album, you mentioned that these are mainly one-take recordings, but even so, in continuing this musical conversation through these recordings, how do you think that it has challenged and grown your own talents?
That's always a good question. I think the people we admire, the John Coltrane's, the Miles Davis, the Duke Ellingtons, whatever generation we want to discuss as like Herbie Hancock, this is an extremely high bar. We just lost, the iconic Chick Corea. I mean, the influence on a place like Berkeley, I can't even tell you, from the acoustic and electric standpoint. So, you're trying to, one of the things I take away from these artists, and Herbie's new autobiography really speaks to it. It's called Possibilities, where, you study and that's just a lifelong thing, even practicing C scales. You don't, I tell all my students, I said, some things you don't walk away from. You might play a tune and not play it for a few years, but in terms of all the fundamental aspects, in terms of like your growth with all the mechanics of music. But I think at the same time is that you hope that these musical events documented that like there will always be something greater than the sum of your history and the sum of the musicians on the date. And you strive for that. You can't predict what level you're going to go to. You can have, a great date. It can be proficient, but, moving up into the magic arena, you can't gauge that, with a measuring stick, but you're hoping that all your training, as I tell my students, everything you've listened to your whole life, all your concerts, rehearsals, all of that is going to hopefully get you to something greater than the totality of all those elements and all.
There was something on your website that we discussed just before the interview. And normally I ask the question, why music? But I want to ask a different question in your case. And the line said, in all things, Leon still gives thanks to God.
My dad's aunt, my Aunt Ruth, who was a missionary, right? So this is and I grew up not wanting anything, on any level possible, from childbirth to now, actually. But so when Christmas rolled around, and she's very meager means, right? So, I'm getting all these fancy toys, the latest this, latest that, G.I. Joe, the latest whatever, going on. And, she would give us it'd be like there might be an oven mitt and like a roll of paper towels. And I was like, I'm thinking of all these, and you're 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's really not registered. You go like, this is the stuff we buy at the grocery store, And then later, even when I got to college, she sent me these little kind of pamphlets that had little Bible quotes and scripture and all. And, I only gained depreciation of her more and more. Like I said, it wasn't like a hardcore thing about us going to church, but I grew up going to Sunday school and all. And I think it's really important. I think one of the world's problems right now is it does one thing not at all and does the other thing ridiculously too much. The world does not give nearly enough thanks. And as I tell my students, the hardest job that I have is learning how not to complain, because with social media, the world, it's in our DNA code. So trying to be thankful and not just be upset with every second of the day, and it's something you have to remind yourself, like exercising. You can think it, but you can go I want to be in shape. But if you don't go to the gym, watch what you eat, it doesn't matter how much you want it, So it's a constant reminder. I mean, I even have a little memo in my reminders, and it's I should be putting something in there every day, but the hardest thing is to learn how to be thankful. It's an ongoing job because you can walk outside and somebody took your parking spot, or, you got to the post office too late. You got charged for your American Express by being 1 day late, or you paid, there's all these things in the world that will make you want to be upset about yourself or everything else going on. And I think you kind of always have to kind of keep that stuff at bay. And it's funny, one of the faculty at Berkeley sent me a nice note today. And I was thinking the greatest line I've ever heard, or two greatest lines I've ever heard from an individual and from a movie. Sammy Davis Jr., "You can't please all of the people all of the time." And William Hurt from Broadcast News, "What if your real life exceeded your dreams?" So I love those. But the thing from William Hurt, I absolutely love that. I tell it to my students as well. I go what's going on? I mean, in my wildest imagination, we can see somebody on TV go "Oh, I'd like to play with Ray Charles or the Beatles or, Lady Gaga, whoever, or New York Philharmonic." But I mean, it gives you're much more thankful when you go wow, this is far beyond what I could imagine. So that's kind of some of my personal, edicts that I use, I guess,
You have much to be thankful for, Leon Lee Dorsey,
Oh. You have no idea.
Do you think of your musical talents as a gift?
Oh, that goes without saying, Every musician I've met, every audience person that's ever sat, Japan, London, California, New York, every person's ever been in a club, from Carnegie Hall to the smallest club I've ever been in, you're thankful for all parties involved,
How do you hope that your gift will help others to be inspired?
Well, like I said, that record was kind of about feeling good. That was kind of why the Sgt. Pepper came out. They had a little bit, and we did a little animated video. I found a young man to do that. And, I get by with a little help from my friends. So we kind of felt that record was very germane to last summer, given where the world was, just okay, again, it was kind of if it helps you forget about what's going on for 10 seconds, you're a little better off.
Leon Lee Dorsey, our guest during In Studio from Simply Timeless. The album is called Thank You, Mr. Mayburn, and it's available through your preferred music vendor. Special thanks to Leon for taking the time to visit with us, and a word of thanks to you, our listener, for joining us. Until we meet again, I'm Jay Daniels. You've been listening to In Studio from Simply Timeless.